And tonight's session is going to cover the analyst view of wireless market, 2012 beyond. I do have last year's presentation and what the top 10 predictions were. We're going to cover that later, okay? In fact, we have a lottery that we voted on, and someone's going to win something. So, but let me turn this over to. Actually, Nelson spoke. He was on our panel a little over 2 years ago. Yeah, he was on our panel discussion. We had VCs talking about where's this investment going? Where's the market? So we thought for this particular session on predictions about where the wireless market is going, it would be good to get someone who knows how to cut through a lot of the sales pitch and get down to where is the money? Where is the money going to get invested? Where is the track going to be? So I'd like to introduce Nelson Chu from Kinetic Ventures. Nelson, come on up and take on, and let's have fun.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I want to thank Bob, thank the Wireless Technology Forum, but also thank Andrei Kominko. Where's Andrei? He's the event manager and put this whole thing together and dealt with a very high maintenance moderator and try to get this thing set up. So I appreciate him doing that for us, which is terrific. So just as a quick overview, again, we're talking about the future of wireless. I thought it'd be helpful as quick context to just put up some fun facts to know and forget. But really, as the point is, this is a huge industry, and so much of what we're doing we take for granted, but we've come a long way, and there's a lot more happening. But one of the fun facts is in Q4 of 2010, which is a year ago, there are more smartphones and tablets sold than PCs. Pretty remarkable. Penetration in the U.S., we're greater than 100% now, right? So if we've got 106 or 110 million households, there's probably close to 116 million wireless connections. So guys like Bob that have 4 cell phones is boosting the average there. Penetration of smartphones in the U.S. is, I think it's actually 56% now. You would know better at Nielsen. But we've reached a pretty big number. 5 billion mobile phones in use in the world now. Mobile subscriptions, broadband subscriptions is predicted to reach 5 billion in about 5 years, which is a huge number. And that's up from 1 billion 3G subs today. So that's a 38% compound annual growth rate. And if you look at average GDP growth right now at a whopping 1%, this is far in a way going to bring a ton of value creation for not just our economy, but economies around the world. Global mobile application and advertising revenues estimated to be about $12 billion this year. That's up 17 times in just 3 years, which is 153% compound annual growth rate. So it's a huge business, as we all know. So what are we going to talk about today? We've got 4 phenomenal speakers on a variety of topics. We'll start with Rob Prudhomme from Nielsen, kind of talking about the statistics for U.S. consumer spending and growth, and hopefully I just threw up some potential questions that we might eventually talk about here. The order is going to be a little bit different. I think Greg is going to go last, but he's going to talk about the 4G ecosystem. We have George Fuenzalida from Enco talking about video, which I think is a terrific topic and a huge topic for all of us, both as users as well as investors. And then from my alma mater, McKinsey & Company, Rock Khanna, who I believe you're down from Chicago, right? Which is terrific, is going to talk about the topic of quote-unquote smart versus dumb pipes. And I actually don't think there is such thing as a dumb pipe, but in content. So some great topics to talk about. So I'll bring Rob here to the podium, but as a quick intro, since I don't think any of you guys have background. So Rob has responsibility for managing the relationship with, I love this part, one of the largest U.S. telecommunications providers. And he's in Atlanta. So In his role, he provides thought leadership for helping his client incorporate Nielsen data into the ongoing decision-making processes. What I think is really cool is he spent 18 years doing not only strategy consulting, technology sales, partnership development, but also wireless network planning, design, implementation, and operations. So he's the real deal here. He's got experience again in sales, planning, and his clients have included device and network infrastructure OEMs, application developers, cable MSOs, fixed, mobile, and converged carriers. So I think we're really fortunate to have Rob here with us. So let's give Rob a warm welcome up here while I pull up his presentation.
I want to thank Nelson for the great introduction. Actually, if you notice one thing about my career, I've gone from more difficult to less difficult topics. So now I'm in basically market research, which is the easiest of all. So I moved from engineering to marketing, and what did I learn? Marketing is not as easy as people make it out to be. So what I'm going to talk about briefly is the changing American family and how the demographics of the United States are really impacting how people need to go to market, especially in the mobile industry and in telecommunications in general. And what I think when you walk away from this, it'll be a good lead into what George is going to talk about, which is video, which is really driving a lot of the consumption both on mobile side as well as on the fixed side, and we're kind of changing modes in terms of how we consume applications and entertainment. So, understanding the new digital American family. I think the thing that pretty much anybody realizes here who has ever watched a show on network television is yes, it is no longer your mother and father's television. So 38 million households right now, only 38 million households have kids. And so it's kind of interesting when you think about the concept of family really has changed, because what we're really talking about is the number of American households that doesn't have children at home is larger than those that do. And as you'll see in a minute, the ones that actually do have less to spend. And so the whole concept of how to market to a family is really requires kind of a radical rethinking. So just a couple of statistics. If you look at where people have traditionally gone in the mobile industry after the prepaid or the postpaid market, one thing to realize is that 49% of the households in the United States are either lower to middle income or struggling. And this, I think, really makes a key point about why 60% of the net adds in the entire industry last year were in the prepaid segment. So this really, I think, is a little bit of a wake-up call to large companies that have gotten fat in the mobile industry with just sort of growing the pie and getting their fair share of the postpaid. Now the slices are getting smaller, there's no more whipped cream, and eventually you're going to have to settle for crumbs. So another point here is that if you look at it by demographics, and I find this statistics really interesting because I'm going to share something with you that is a little counterintuitive on this. So the biggest sort of ethnic demo that around households with children is that Hispanics are the fastest growing and have the largest and are in the lowest income bracket. However, they have the highest penetration. Hispanics have the highest penetration for smartphone ownership of every ethnic group. And what that really says is, of the money they do have, they're willing to spend more of it on mobility and communications. So another thing is fewer people are getting married. Those who did get married aren't staying married. And some people are just choosing to never be married. So enough said about that. I'm still happily married, though, at least until this presentation. So of the different ethnic groups, African American has the lowest percentage of people who have decided that it makes sense to be married. one thing that a lot of people who are used to marketing to the mass have to really rethink how to be effective at marketing to segments that behave very differently than the average. So another little thing from the Pew study on marriage. So 39% say marriage is obsolete, and a majority of those who do say marriage is obsolete are, sort of younger, high school or less education, and lower than average household income. But the good news is those who have gotten married have lower levels of conflict, but fewer shared activities. And I think really that's saying a lot about the tablet as a saver of marriages, not just as a cool new technology. Gives you a little something else to pay attention to besides what your spouse is saying. But but seriously, sort of getting back to like what does all this mean for somebody that's marketing to this changing demographic? And I think that one aspect is clearly the mobile industry has gotten where it is by pretty much just getting your fair share of a growing pie. But now those days are over. We have well over 100% penetration. And the growth is coming in second devices and also in lower value connections, right? If you think about a tablet versus a smartphone that has both voice and data, the value of those new connections is lower. And in some cases, there's opportunity in, the large carriers have always wanted to own every connection. But what we're seeing now is people splitting connections between carriers. Maybe I have a smartphone on one carrier and I choose to get a prepaid data plan with an air card on Virgin Mobile because it's a lot cheaper and it's unlimited. So you're starting to see a lot more of those types of decisions being made. So for people going after the demographic where they really want to go after a limited amount of spending, you have to rethink about how you target those people. A lot of them also are households with no kids. So, that kind of makes you rethink the whole concept of a family plan. And I think a good example of that is my father never believed in cell phones. When he finally did believe in cell phones, he only believed in Lifeline service. Until my sister started paying for him, now he loves cell phones. So I think, the family plan where you're pulling multiple generations and somebody who's retired and doesn't have a lot of income, but can be a member of a family plan of somebody who is still employed and actively working is another way to attack that. And then I think the other thing is that you have to look at what are those opportunities where people have, and this is social networking, right? Okay. Social networking is obviously a huge new thing that people are spending a large amount of time on. And so that's one area where people are really looking, where can I find commonality with the people that I'm trying to reach? And how can I can no longer control the message, but how can I potentially use the people who have strong social networks to influence my message and reach the segments that I'm trying to reach? So how do you go about reaching that new digital American family? A couple of ideas here on the next pages, and I'm sure we're going to get to a lot more with the other panelists. But so one thing is people are really shifting how they consume media in a very large way. Traditional TV is declining, viewership of traditional TV, and it's kind of being replaced by both time-shifted and place-shifted consumption. Probably the most recent statistic that Nielsen has captured in terms of online is that the use of online video has grown up by 2 hours per month in the past 2 years, and that trend seems to be accelerating. And then you have the internet and new media, and one of the really interesting aspects of this is concurrent use. 70% of people who use a tablet use it while they're watching television. And so that really says a lot about how do you create programming that causes people to engage better, because you're not just competing for eyeballs, you're competing for brain cycles, right? Who's watching you and paying attention, and that's a key aspect. So if you look at it demographically, how people consume TV also is pretty different by demographic groups. If you look at total use of TV, Hispanics are pretty low, but when they do watch, they tend to watch, with members of the whole family or the household watching together, whereas African Americans have much higher consumption, but tend to watch alone more often. High-income families spend the least amount of time watching TV, no surprise there, because they can afford iPads. But they're 4 times more likely to shift their television consumption either on a time or a place-shifting basis. And I think one of the interesting things on the next one is that they are also the ones that are driving kind of the trend around paid online consumption. One of the interesting facts about online video is all of the bandwidth is consumed by YouTube, and all the money is being earned by Netflix and Hulu. So, one of the biggest reasons that people watch Netflix and Hulu is not to save money, but it's basically to use as a DVR in the sky. And my father, of course, likes to watch the old episodes. He doesn't like the new Hawaii Five-0. He's actually became a Netflix subscriber so he could watch the old version of Hawaii Five-0. So, not surprising, the highest income households are also the biggest users of internet. But what they use the internet for is very different. If you look at it by income bracket, you see that on the low income end, it's a lot more ethnically focused sites. In the middle income bracket, it tends to be a little bit more entertainment and kid focused. And in the high income bracket, it tends to be more educational focused. I think this is probably one of the most surprising things that came out of this study for me is to see the difference in how, by income, people actually spend time on the internet. So, what does this mean in terms of actually reaching these new customers? Well, if people have been talking about mobile advertising for a long time, and people have been obviously spending a lot of money on online advertising. One of the most interesting things I've seen recently is, if you're familiar with Mary Meeker, who's now at Kleiner Perkins, she has a chart that looks at the ad dollars spent versus the amount of hours that people spend on a given medium. And by far, online and mobile is where people are spending their hours watching, and the spend in advertising in those mediums tremendously lags the amount of time people are spending there. Part of the reason is companies like Nielsen haven't figured out yet a way to measure it. It's a very complicated thing because we're not measuring just eyeballs, but engagement, right? Like I said before, somebody's watching a television program and on their tablet, where they actually engaged. So what we're looking for with brands is ways to engage people in a more interactive way, where if you're watching a television show, maybe you get a prompt about one of the characters, or you get a chance to play a trivia game about that show. And so you're engaging with the programming, and therefore allowing you both to engage with the programmer as well as the advertisers in a better way. This is just a little excerpt from a mobile ad effectiveness study that we did. And what we found was that people exposed to a advertisement on a tablet were more than twice as likely to recall it than those who had seen it just on television. And they remember the brand 5 times more often than if they had seen it on TV. So finally, what does it really mean? I mean, to go after these changing demographics, it really means, if we're having a shrinking share in size, then you need to really think about what's the multi-channel strategy and what's my channel to reach each of the segments most effectively, right? If television's been my primary means of advertising, can I really have an effective online strategy if I'm going after people that don't necessarily have internet or spend much time on the internet? Secondly is device usage is key. So getting back to the example of Hispanic families, they spend less time watching traditional TV, but they're more likely to be smartphone owners. So maybe a more effective strategy is mobile, more heavily mobile influenced if I'm going after that segment. And then I also think that, where households have the ability to own a lot of different types of devices and consume media, that argues for a consistent message across all those mediums. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges that brands have right now is how to be consistent in their branding across all these different channels. And then the last thing is that basically the largest reach still comes through television and online, but the biggest challenge is that finding an effective way to get people to engage in an increasingly diversified, the amount of content out there has exploded, and getting people to really engage with your brand and with your message has become much more difficult. And there's fewer dollars to go after it, so you have to be more intelligent about your channel strategy to reach the segment that you care about. So that's it.
Thank you, Rob. That was terrific. And I think Greg's here, right? Excellent. The flight made it in. So our next speaker is Greg Tevis from Deloitte. Came in from Texas, I believe.